who owns the equity? Who owns the land? The rich.
The free market hasn't made us free. That's the case Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz makes in his latest book, The Road to Freedom.
Under neoliberalism, banks were given the freedom to exploit others. The economy collapsed. The billionaires live in a fantasy world. If we tax land in the United States, it's not going to get angry with us and move over to Russia. A minimum tax on wealth for the super wealthy. If you haven't paid 2%, something's screwy going on.
You join us from America today, the land of the free, but your book is called The Road to Freedom. So I just want to ask you a pretty open question, first of all. Do you feel free, Professor Stiglitz?
No one is perfectly free. Part of the thesis of my book is that one person's freedom may impinge on that of another. And so we all have to take account of the effects that we could have on others. But at this particular moment, I really do fear for the freedom of Americans.
How would you define freedom? Because I believe people have different definitions of freedom.
That's a good question. So I approach this basically in the book as an economist. So what I mean by freedom is what you're free to do. So somebody who is at the point of starvation doesn't really have freedom. He does what he has to do in order to survive. And then economists talk about increasing your freedom in terms of increasing your opportunity set, what you could do. And so the range of things that you can do is a metric of the degree of freedom that you have.
And you set out in your book that the right side of the political spectrum have basically taken an idea of freedom and used it for political purposes and wrapped it in a definition of their own. Could you explain to us how you think that they've kind of taken freedom?
Well, they made a number of mistakes and in many occasions focused on one aspect of freedom, but not, you might say, another aspect that may be more important. So, as an example, I mentioned before how one person's freedom can impinge on the freedom of others. So they focus on the first freedom, but not the adverse effect on the others. So let me give you an example. They would talk about your freedom to not get vaccinated during the pandemic. But they don't talk about the fact that because of that freedom, the disease spreads, somebody's going to get COVID-19 and somebody's going to die. Well, let me tell you, taking away somebody's life is a real reduction in that person's freedom. He has no more freedom. So what I say, you have to look at both sides, and which is more important, the freedom not to get vaccinated or the freedom to live. And that's an example of the trade-off. One of the things I also highlight in my book is that going back to America's revolution, it sought freedom from the UK. It was a kind of political freedom. It was a revolution about political freedom, the right of self-government in the United States. But it was a particular kind of freedom, because it was the right of rich, white, male property owners to rule in America, and as transferred from the British monarch and the British ruling class. But it wasn't really about freedom. In many states, there were more people enslaved. And the Constitution did not change that. So if it had been a Constitution about freedom, it would have ended slavery. But it didn't do that. It actually ensconced slavery.
So your criticism of, say, off the back of that would be like the neoliberalism movement. Like liberal is a funny word, isn't it? Because it means freedom, and what you're hinting at is we often use freedom, and it defines the freedom of a very small subsect of people, basically.
Exactly. That's the core idea. And so under neoliberalism, we took away, banks were said, don't regulate banks. So banks were given the freedom to exploit others, to undertake excessive risk-taking. And what did that mean? Well, the banks did exercise that freedom. They did exploit others. They did engage in excessive risk-taking. And the economy collapsed. And so the rest of us lost the freedom to have a job, the freedom to own your home, and we as taxpayers had to bail them out because the alternative was letting the whole economy tank. So in a fundamental sense, we gave the bankers more freedom, but the rest of us lost our freedom.
Who gets to define what freedom is the right kind?
Well, part of the point of my book, you need a public dialogue over this, a democratic dialogue. And in the examples I gave you earlier, the trade-offs were fairly clear. Most rational people would come to the same conclusion. But it's not always the case that people are going to agree. You know, we have a very virulent debate in the United States over, to give you another example of freedom, the freedom to carry an AK-47, a rifle, a gun. Well, if you have a lot of guns running around our society, I could tell you, you can be pretty sure a lot of people are going to get killed. So what's happening? Which is more important, the right to carry around an AK-47 or the right to live? Again, rational societies, I think, would come to an agreement that freedom to live is more important than freedom to carry AK-47, but not the view of the Republicans in the United States. Freedom of speech is a more complicated issue, and another example where the American right gets very, very confused. We have free speech, very important, but free speech has always been circumscribed in one way or another. You can't cry fire in a crowded theater. You can't commit libel or other forms of. There are restrictions. Okay, the question is, where do you define the line? So we've always restricted some forms of speech that are excessively socially destructive. On the other hand, we're in a world with social media where these boundaries are changing. So, for instance, social media played a very important role in the incitement of the Rohingya massacres in Myanmar. And in countries like Germany, there were restrictions on hate speech for good reasons. And a society living together may decide that certain kinds of extremist language may be excessively socially divisive. One has to really balance this really hard to decide where the boundaries are. On the other hand, some of what is going on in the United States is an attempt to circumscribe speech in a way I think that can't be justified. And remember, why is it that free speech is so important? One of the reasons it's so important is to curb an abusive government, a corrupt government. root out, corruption, not only in government, but in the private sector. And obviously, those in power never liked free speech because they don't want to be exposed.
I think if we come back to the freedom point, I think you're speaking to two Brits, right? So gun control to us, we have gun controls, we don't have gun crime. These kind of things to us seem like common sense, right? But what I want to look at is freedoms that are a little bit more nuanced. So what about, say, the freedom to pursue profit or the freedom to amass wealth and buy assets? How do you draw lines there? Because I think that speaks to a lot of the issues in the UK at the moment around perceived inequality and, the wealth of people. This feels to me harder to balance.
Yeah, those issues are harder than some of the simpler issues. But as you say, in the UK, the issue of guns is obvious. And it's only in America that it's more complicated. The basic first point I would raise, and one I think in the case question you asked is on the more obvious side, is you shouldn't be able to make money by exploiting other people. If you became wealthy by slavery, that's not, that shouldn't be acceptable. Clearly, the wealth that was based on that kind of exploitation is not legitimate wealth. And we ought to do everything to curb that. Now, those are obvious examples, but monopoly power is exploitation. There are many people who take advantage of the ignorance of others, so exploitation today takes many, many forms. And I would say much of capitalism today is exploitive capitalism. But on the other hand, there are aspects of people who are innovative, are making a contribution to society, and you should say, shouldn't they take away the fruits of that innovation? And I would say they need to be rewarded for that innovation. Yes. But I would say also, they would not have been successful if society had not provided the basics of what they do. So like even in the area of technological innovation, Isaac Newton talked about his standing on the shoulders of those who went before him. All research is based on the research of those that have gone before you. You couldn't have done it if others hadn't done it with the earlier work. So nothing is created, almost nothing, ab initio. So everybody has to say, my success is partly as a result of others. Similarly, you can't make money if there's no rule of law, if there's chaos. That requires government. Government requires taxes. So we as a society have to work together. So again, there's a kind of interdependence. I can, in the book, I try to go into that in greater detail, but the basic point is that even when you legitimately earn your money from your hard work, from your innovation, you're not exploiting others, your success is in part the result of the contribution of others. How much of your success is a result of theirs, how you should share your success with others is a complex societal issue that has to be addressed. But it isn't as if you did everything on your own.
Okay, T, talk to me about your attitudes towards risk.
I mean, I like a bit of risk in my investments, but I definitely would say since the podcast, I've toned it down a little bit, not quite as gung-ho and like carefree as I was in risk. So yeah,
shooting from the hip all the time, weren't you? Yeah, I think personally that you should take risks, but it should always be in areas where you have a unique skill set, an edge, expertise, like your job, things like this.
Definitely.
One area that I wouldn't take any risks is compliance.
Yeah, the risk changes as you grow in business, and you need to be on top of it, which is why we partner with Vanta.
Vanta automates a lot of risk processes and helps you see your risks in a centralized platform so you know what really needs your attention.
Besides risk, the main thing Vanta does is automate compliance with security protocols you need to scale, like GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and SOC 2.
The beauty of Vanta is they make it easy to prove you're compliant with these standards, saving you up to 90% of the time it takes. And on average, $500,000.
If you know what these acronyms like SOC 2 are, you probably need Vanta. You can book in a demo at vanta.com/making money. There's a link in the description.
Yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation if someone hadn't laid down the phone lines and the internet and all the technology. You know, I didn't make the cameras. How do you convince people that firmly believe that a smaller government is freedom when you're basically saying that there needs to be that government input of redistribution and a bit of coercion almost to give people freedom?
Well, first, I think the United States is learning chaotically smaller government isn't working very well. Americans rely on Social Security for their retirement. Hard to get a phone call to your Social Security Administration if you have a problem. You know, you take for granted certain things until you don't have them. And Trump, in a few short months, has taken away a lot of things that we took for granted. And we now realize how important things are. If you don't have air controllers, planes crash into each other. You don't feel very safe. So much of what we do in a modern society requires collective action. A simple thing, stoplights. If we didn't have stoplights, we'd have gridlock. Stoplights are government. Government puts in those stoplights. But if you don't take turns, no one can go. Okay? So if we take away, just imagine, take away all those things like stoplights, government retirement programs, unemployment insurance, our society grinds to a halt and our well-being plummets. Public education is absolutely essential for poor people to get an adequate education. If we don't have good public health, diseases will spread. So I think the problem is we've been so successful that we take for granted all the things that government does. Now, if you're a multi-billionaire, you don't need government to educate your children. You can have your private airplane. You still need the air traffic controllers, by the way, but you can do without a lot of the things. You don't need a public park because you have your own park. The billionaires live in a fantasy world because if they took away the essential services from everybody else, their life is not going to be very pleasant. So their problem is they can't project what a real society with small government would look like. But let me be, a little frank. Most of the small government people are hypocrites. A lot of the Silicon Valley people who say, I want small government, are making their money off of the government. Elon Musk, Tesla survived because it got almost a $500 million loan from the government when it needed it. SpaceX has billions of dollars of government contracts. So when they say small government, what they mean is, I want government to help me, but not poor people.
carbon credits as well for Tesla? I think were a big part of their profitability for a long time, which was these kind of government schemes as well. So the overall idea of freedom, I think, is really compelling, because I think most people in America and in England will say, my life feels a little bit worse today than it probably should. And I think if you frame it through freedom, you get a clear answer for that. But if we zoom out on a global perspective, hasn't, like, the systems that you criticize led to millions of people in China lifting out of poverty, say? Aren't we as a globe more free than we've ever been?
Well, you're right that economic growth in the last 50 years has raised, some 800 million people out of poverty in China, many people out of poverty in other countries. There have been some setbacks in the last 5 years. But overall, it's been a big success in those terms. Still, a lot of people have been left out. But, and in that narrow sense, they've gotten more freedom. But the question we're facing today is a question about the encroachment of the authoritarian governments, imperfectly democratic governments around the world, and taking away political freedom. And my view is that that in turn will undermine economic freedom in many, many ways. And that we today in the West particularly are rich enough that we can have political and economic freedom. And so what's going on in the United States, what I see is we're losing our political freedom, but at the same time, the policies are hurting those at the bottom, taking away their economic freedom, and overall are going to lead to slower growth for the country as a whole. And so, on average, Americans are actually going to be losing their economic freedom.
But isn't, when you say some equality is always to be expected, I was watching your podcast and you said the wolves and the sheep and like the freedom of the...
Freedom for the wolf is death for the sheep.
Exactly. So isn't inequality to be expected? And how do you know when freedom is too much freedom?
Every society is going to have some freedom, some inequality. And so the notion that you're going to get rid of all inequality, it's just not realistic. And economists will say you need some incentives, and different people will be motivated in different ways. And so even a well-functioning society is going to have some inequality. But what has happened in the United States and some other countries, but particularly in the United States, is the inequality has been generated, I would say, in the wrong way, and it's become excessive. When I say the wrong way, what I mean is a lot of the inequality is a result of exploitation. I mentioned a lot of the forms of that exploitation, but like the monopolies, taking advantage of other people. Drug companies, I haven't listed them, tobacco companies who increase the addiction of their cigarettes. There's so many examples of companies that have made their profits by exploiting others. So for me, that kind of inequality is illegitimate.
Is this human nature, though?
It's the nature of some people, but not of most people. I think most people are decent. I think most people have empathy for others. And they think about the consequences. And we work hard to make our children that way, to make our children socialized, to be sensitive to what the consequences of their actions on others. But history is on your side. There are always some people who are willing to make money for themselves, to give themselves power at the expense of the well-being of others. Absolutely. And that's why society as a whole has to get together and say, no, you can't do that. And you might say, this goes back to the Ten Commandments. Some people stole money from other people. You can say, well, isn't that always the case? No. Yes, there may be a few people who do that, but you write a regulation and you say, no, you can't do that. That's not the way you can get wealthy. Now, stealing takes a more sophisticated form in a modern economy. It may be monopoly power. It may be some other abusive practice. And so it's not just you can write down in a short 10 commandments, but what we have to do is to say regulate and say you can't do that. That's antisocial. Our society can't function if you engage in that. And by doing that, you make a freer society. You stop the bad guys, but you free up everybody else.
Last time we recorded, Tremaine, you were having some real dramas with your accountant. So how's that been going, mate?
They're sacked. So drama sorted. They're a big corporate firm. They didn't really reply to my emails very quickly, like took a week or two at times. And they charged me way too much. I mean, I've got pretty simple taxes and they were charging me thousands. They saved me some money, but I had to move on.
Slow and expensive.
Pretty much, yeah.
This is one of the reasons that we're really happy to be partnering with Taxzap.
It's a tech platform that makes self-assessment simple. Whether you're self-employed like me, a freelancer, or a director like Damo, big dog.
Instead of sending endless emails, bills and spreadsheets to your accountant, you just connect your bank, answer a few questions that are only relevant to you, and your tax return can be ready in as little as 15 minutes.
Taxzap is really easy to use and it's HMRC recognized software. So it's safe, secure, and legit.
The price is also decent. So if you're self-employed with one income stream, it's just £89 as a one-off fee. No big accountancy fees. And we also have a discount code, of course.
If you need to file a self-assessment this year, give Taxzap a try. We've left a link in the description and use the code MONEY10 for 10% off your first tax filing. I would say that freedom is definitely heading in the right direction, despite all the things you say about like political issues. But as a proud member of the Black community, I feel that I guess like 50 years ago, it probably was a lot harder to be a Black person in UK or America than it is today. However, I still don't feel like I have the same freedoms as Damien. Like, I don't think he's ever been pulled over in his life, but I've been pulled over like 10 times, like, why are you driving a Mercedes? Because
you look dodgy, mate. Because you look dodgy.
Because I bought it, it's my car. So it seems like, even though there is a lot more freedom for Black people generally, and I'm sure other people feel like this, maybe like homosexuals or, marginalized people, there's more freedom, but it still doesn't feel like no matter how much money you have or like how successful you get, you have the same freedom. It's like it's a level playing field, essentially. Oh,
you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that society should be trying to address. You can't change people's mindsets overnight, but over time you can. And, those of us who were in the civil rights movement, like I did, marched with Martin Luther King. I was down there in Washington when he gave a I Have a Dream speech.
You saw that in person?
Yeah, I was there. I was one of the people marching with Martin Luther King. So, that was our dream. And we have a long way to go. But some of the policies that we were putting in place, like affirmative action, are trying to change people's mindsets. And what makes me so sad right now is how Trump is trying to reverse all that progress. That he's trying to get rid of what we call DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's been a long struggle, and for me, I might say I was so hopeful back then in 1963. It's been a real disappointment that we haven't made more progress. But the real disappointment is what's happening right now, which is the reversal of what progress we have.
Do you not think Martin Luther King will be pretty proud of kind of where it has got to in a lot of ways? I mean, like you say, like more should be done, but do you think he would look at the progress and say, we did a good job there?
I think he would have been more hopeful that we would have done more. I think no matter how you look at it, you look at the statistics, economics,
even the imprisonment rate like shocks me. Like the level at which black men get into the prison system in America is quite a scary statistic.
I mean, and you gave a very good example. In America, we call the crime that you got stopped for driving while black.
Heard that one many times.
What?
Driving while black.
Driving while black.
That's your crime. That's why you got stopped.
That's crazy.
I heard that. This thing sounds like 13. I first heard that phrase, which is crazy. Yeah.
You're obviously critical of the Trump regime and your perceived undoing of freedoms, but you touched on monopolies, and I just want to kind of point out that the modern day monopolies existed before Trump, right? The Google, Facebook, these kind of companies that dominate, and no one's done anything about it. So,
we were on a campaign. That's one of the things that President Biden was very good at. He appointed somebody, a colleague of mine at Columbia, Elena Kahn, was the head of the FTC. Another colleague of mine at Columbia, Tim Wu, they were in the White House, and they were really taking a concerted effort to restrain the power of the big tech giants. Europe is also trying to do that with what's called the Digital Marketing Act, the DMA. But now, what worries me again is going back, unleashing the power of the monopolies. And it's even worse than that. Trump is going to Europe and says, if you don't change your DMA, we will impose tariffs on you. He says competition policy is an unfair trade practice. I view competition policy as a basic prerequisite for good economic policy. And it just is another illustration of the badness of the economic policy of Donald Trump.
And what about AI in that then, and the policies around that? Because we had an economist here before, and he said he was concerned because he feels that technology has a tendency to worsen inequality, exacerbate problems if it's not structured in the right way or regulated properly. Do you share that opinion?
Yes, I share that worry that AI has the risk. We don't know exactly where AI is going to go, but it has the risk of causing unemployment among workers who are engaged in routine jobs, because it can do those routine jobs better, and that will increase the labor, the wage inequality. So it is a real risk. We're not yet seeing the data, partly because AI is still small in the economy, and its impact is so far been limited. But there's one more aspect of AI that is actually more worrisome, and that is the ability of AI to undermine aspects of our society. So, we've all been worried about, for instance, the way social media does targeting. It figures out how to get more engagement through enragement. How it polarizes. Okay, and those are just examples of some of the adverse effects of AI, of social media. AI puts all of that on steroids. It has the power to make things much worse. So to me, having safe and ethical AI is absolutely imperative. And that means you have to have regulation. And Europe has tried, imperfectly, but moved in the right direction with the Digital Services Act. UK has moved in the right direction. The United States has done nothing. And I think that's part of the problems that we're having in our society today.
I want to talk about wealth inequality a bit as well, because this is a big topic in the UK, very big. I think the two political movements in the UK are immigration or tax the rich, basically. This is like the left and right sides of it. You advised President Clinton, another cool thing that you've done in your life, but he lowered capital gains tax, didn't he?
I oppose that. We had an intense debate inside the administration. I said, who's going to get the benefits of lowering the capital gains taxes? Who owns the equity? Who owns the land? The rich. And by lowering the tax on capital gains, you are reducing the progressivity of the tax, and you're creating more inequality in our society for no benefit. Let me give the extreme example. Take capital gains on land. Do you think lowering the tax on land is going to make land more? Obviously not. The land is there. The land really is part of the national heritage. And yet a few people are making an awful lot of money off of the capital gains on land. And then to say, I'm not going to tax them at a lower rate, that's outrageous. And that's what I said. I lost that debate. I won it in the sense that my prediction that would contribute to the increase of inequality, my prediction that it would not increase the rate of growth of the economy, both of those turned out to be correct.
Yeah, I think it goes even further to your point before. The value of the land is often derived from the activity of the population, the taxes they pay, right? Why is land in central London worth more than that in, I don't know, like anywhere in Africa, essentially? It's because of the tax base and the rule of law and all of these systems that go into giving that land value. So
absolutely,
you've done nothing to generate that as an individual, have you? You've just got lucky that it's in the right spot.
Yeah, and it's even worse in the United States because you buy a piece of land and underneath it somebody discovers there's oil.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, not too shabby.
But a lot of people have done. Did they create the oil? It was just luck. Maybe they may have done some exploration to try to figure out where it was, but still, they didn't create the oil.
So, I mean, you could tax it then? I mean, would that not be the form of redistribution that you would look for?
I've argued very high taxes on land and on natural resources. By the way, that's not my original idea. There was a great economist in the 19th century called Henry George.
Georgism, yeah.
Yeah, Georgism, a whole movement. And some people think of me as trying to be reinvigorating in the 20th and 21st century Georgism.
Well, I made a video on it recently on land value tax in the UK, so you can blame it on me instead if you want.
Okay. You're a fellow Georgist.
Yeah. Well, no, I just live in a nation where everyone's saying we need more tax revenue, or the government are saying that, and I'm just like, how can we get that revenue without taxing labour? Because I feel that taxing work is probably not the answer, because I feel like workers get taxed enough, and whatever you tax, you get less of it, apart from land, because it doesn't just fall off a cliff if you start taxing it, you know?
Yeah, or the way I sometimes put it, if we tax land in the United States, it's not going to get angry with us and move over to Russia.
Yeah, it's not going to Dubai.
I don't like you. I don't like you. I'm going to become Russian land. It's not the way it works.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of the land ownership in the UK, it was basically divvied up, in 1066. And the same, you can trace it all the way back, and you've got like the duchies, which belong to the royal family, and they make tens of millions a year off owning the coastline of the UK. How could anyone claim to own the coastline of a country in that sense? It's they charge people to bring their boats on. It feels like it should belong to the country, right? I don't know.
Exactly.
Are you a proponent then of, what about softer form? Land is obvious because it's there, but Elon Musk, a lot of his wealth is tied up in the value of a company. And how are you going to would you tax that? And how would you make that work practically?
So here, there's a lot of confusion about what a corporate profits tax is. And some people say if you tax corporate profits, people won't invest. It discourages investment in the activity, just like a tax on labor discourages work. But if you look at what a corporate profits tax is, you deduct not only the labor that you hire, but you also deduct the cost of the capital. You depreciate the investment. In most countries, you deduct the interest. So what the corporate profits tax is a tax on the return beyond your capital, beyond your labor. And so it's really a tax on, for instance, monopoly profits. So my view is that one could have a much higher tax on corporations without deleterious effects, particularly in an economy like the United States. Small open economies, there's a real problem about whether firms might move to another country. So you have to worry about decisions where to locate to produce. And that was where there was an attempt globally to try to reach a compact consensus about a global minimum tax. That was why that was important. But for a big economy like the EU or the US, you can raise taxes a lot and say, if you want to operate, if you want to sell in the United States, which is a huge market, you have to pay your fair share.
What about a company like Uber that is arguably a monopoly or an emerging one? It comes into markets and it just destroys the taxi economy, doesn't it, and replaces it. But then they report to make no money for ever. How do you tax that? Because the guys who own it are worth quite a lot of money, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a more difficult issue because a lot of the money they've made is speculation. They believe and hope that Uber's monopoly position will get it profits in the future. But meanwhile, because the stock markets look forward, gamble, hope, the guys walk off today with money based on the belief of what profits they make in the future. So the way to answer that, you can't answer that through a corporate profits tax because, as you said, they haven't yet made profits. They just began to in the case of some of these companies. But the way you answer that is to tax the individual. When you should have a tax on the market value of the stock, of the wealth that they own. And there's been a big movement of what is called a minimum tax on wealth for the super wealthy. So you have, say, a 2% minimum wealth tax. If you own $1 billion, you should be able to make at least 5 or 10% return on that. next 50 to $100 million. And so a minimum tax says if you haven't paid 2%, 2% is only $20 million. If you haven't paid 2% of your wealth in a tax, something's screwy going on. And you're engaged in tax avoidance. And so this idea of a minimum wealth tax is getting a lot of resonance, a lot of discussion. Just recently in France on this issue, it came up in the G20.
I would love to dive into that with you, but we've got 3 minutes left before your time's up. So I'd just like to ask you one more question, please, if I can. What gives you hope? What do you look at in today and think, that's a shining light. That's something that could be good. Have you got anything positive for us?
Well, just recently in Argentina, in the province of Buenos Aires, voters voted against Milei overwhelmingly. They said this extreme right-wing economic policy isn't working. So at the moment, I'm feeling maybe that will happen in the U.S. Also, what gives me hope is most of the young people that I encounter are really committed to freedom, to our democracy, to understanding freedom in the way that I understand it. And it gives me hope, too, that here at my university, at Columbia, there's enormous solidarity among the faculty to fight for academic freedom, to fight for freedom of press, to fight for all the dimensions of freedom that I've talked about today. And so what has gone on is given, that kind of solidarity gives me hope.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. You're making the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
So, T, how long did it take you to message your family about the Martin Luther King thing?
About 30 seconds. My dad's like, that's crazy. He studied Joseph Stiglitz in his university degree in economics. He's like, oh, I studied him for my papers. He's a big dog. I'm like, he's a huge dog.
Absolute legend in the game.
And he marched with Martin Luther King.
Yeah, he said it so casually as well. Had an argument with Bill Clinton, marched with Martin Luther King.
The most casual name drop and the most emphatic ever.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, if you like legendary economists, we've interviewed Ha-Joon Chang as well, and here's his episode, so you can check that out. That was really good.
Big dog.
He's pointing at me. Woof.